Bioshock is a first-person shooter released in 2007 from the mind of prolific game developer Ken Levine. A spiritual successor to the System Shock series, Bioshock is often considered one of the greatest video games ever made, but I missed out. When the game first released in 2007, I was 6 years old, so even attempting to play this game probably would have scarred me for life. Thankfully, Bioshock did receive a remaster in 2016 in the form of the Bioshock Collection. It was here that I tried the game for the first time, but I only got about an hour in and stopped playing. I don't even remember why. So 8 years later, we will change that and play through this iconic game all the way through. Bioshock begins with a plane crashing into the ocean. Thanks to his plot armor, our protagonist Jack is the lone survivor. He desperately makes his way to the first place he can find, which ends up being a lighthouse. It's here that Jack is transported to Rapture, an underwater city. In Rapture, Jack is contacted by a mysterious man named Atlas. Atlas needs help saving his family and guides us through the city in return. At one point we encounter plasmids, granting Jack otherworldly abilities such as telekinesis. This is the basis for the first act of the game, with Jack following the path laid out by Atlas as we explore Rapture and fight off its ghastly creatures. The first thing that stuck out to me about the game was its incredible atmosphere. Rapture is such a uniquely dark world. What makes Rapture so disturbing is that you can see what it used to be. You see the beautiful buildings that once held wealthy individuals. You can see the refined, elegant areas that are now surrounded by rubble. Rapture is able to feel dangerous and scary while still retaining the qualities that once made it a revered utopia. The city perfectly represents everything the game is going for, and it is the perfect backdrop for the story that is about to unfold. Speaking of, the early story is a bit sparse, but that is of course on purpose. A major moment comes when we encounter our first Big Daddy and Little Sister. Little Sisters are genetically modified children who wander Rapture. They are protected by the Big Daddies, the most formidable foes you will encounter throughout the game. If you are able to take one down, you will be given a choice to kill the little sister he was protecting, or save her. Atlas tells you to kill them all, while a new character, Dr. Tenenbaum, urges you to save them. Whichever choice you make will grant you Atom, the currency used to buy upgrades and new abilities. While saving the little sister certainly seems like the moral choice, the player will receive more Atom for killing them, leaving you with a decision to make. You must decide whether you trust Atlas or Tenenbaum more, and whether the extra Atom is worth the kill, adding a nice role-playing element as you decide who your character will be. Since we're on the topic of the Big Daddy fights, let's talk about the gameplay for a bit. There is such an impressive amount of abilities for a game from this time, and the way they interact with the enemies and world is even more impressive. If you shock an enemy in water, for example, they react accordingly. On top of that, the incredible variety with these abilities allows you to completely alter your playstyle depending on how you want to approach things. You can play stealthy, summoning a hologram that enemies will target, or use a hypnotic ability to get enemies to fight for you. Or you could go guns blazing using fire and ice abilities to gain quick kills. I think my only minor complaint would be the gunplay. Shooting isn't as tight as I would want it to be. It can sometimes feel like bullets don't go where you want them to go. This could be a sign of the game's age as an early game in the 360 PS3 era before FPS games were perfected. However, I do feel like this was also possibly on purpose as a way to increase difficulty and to ensure you are using your plasmids instead of just guns. I totally understand that, which is why I call it a minor complaint. Because even if I get why they may have done that, it doesn't mean it was any less frustrating at times. Outside of combat, exploration is pretty limited, with a giant arrow directing you exactly where to go at almost all times. Going off the beaten path will find you some cool upgrades or helpful loot, but there isn't a whole lot else to find. I don't mind this at all. I actually prefer a nice linear game most of the time, but I know I'm in the minority there, and many modern day gamers want open worlds with tons of side missions and random stuff to find. You aren't going to get that here, but that's okay. What Bioshock may lack in modern exploration or elite gunplay, it makes up for with its intoxicating atmosphere and endlessly engaging story. One of my favorite parts in the game is when we meet the deranged artist Sander Cohen. In this level, Cohen forces the player on a quest to kill several different people, photograph them, and place the photos onto his new sculpture. I think this level perfectly encapsulates everything that makes Bioshock great. You get the crazy characters, the incredible scenery, the deep lore, the disturbing imagery, all of it gets represented in this level. I also found the combat actually started to flow a lot better for me during this level, partly because I had been getting better at the game, and partly because I had unlocked so many new powers and weapons. Everything started to click here. I was having the most fun I had been having with the game throughout this segment, but then it hit me. Why am I doing this anyway? I just met this random artist who told me to kill complete strangers that had no prior connection to the story. Cohen does say that he won't let us leave unless we help. But still, Jack never asked many questions or looked for other alternatives, and as the player, neither did I. It made me reflect on the earlier portions of the game, where Jack had done similar things without question. And just as I started to wonder why this is, as if the game had read my mind, the plot twist occurred. We find out that basically everything we have been told so far is a lie. Our protagonist Jack is not some random guy who survived a plane crash, he is actually the son of Andrew Ryan, the very man who founded Rapture. It's here that Ryan reveals Jack is under mind control of Atlas, being forced to do everything he says. Jack kills Ryan as he was told to do, and with Ryan gone, Atlas can reveal his true identity of Frank Fontaine, a criminal who was a prominent figure in the collapse of Rapture. Frank has been using Jack, knowing he was strong enough to take on Rapture and eventually take out Ryan. With Ryan dead, Frank can take control of Rapture and even extend his power to the surface. Frank no longer needs Jack, so he sets off the security system hoping to kill him, but Jack is able to narrowly escape thanks only to the help of a little sister. That was a lot of information to throw at you, and honestly it kind of felt that way while playing the game as well. Things escalate very quickly, but it doesn't feel overly out of left field. Atlas not being who he said he was is pretty clearly hinted at earlier, and Jack's real identity explains some of the inexplicable ways he's made it this far. What I loved most about this twist though was just the way I totally got hooked by it. Like I said earlier, literally the second I began to question why I am doing any of this, we got the big reveal. What a masterful job by the writers to get your mind thinking in the right direction without blatantly spelling it out. Now it's time for the third and final act of the game, where we team up with Tenenbaum and the Little Sisters to take down Frank. This section is very cool overall, as Jack essentially transforms himself into a Big Daddy so that the Little Sisters will follow him. You have to find their different body parts and even change your voice to sound like them. The little details like your footsteps sounding different as you transform was a really nice touch. I really loved this concept, and getting to become one of these strong creatures that had killed me dozens of times throughout the game was quite satisfying. I suppose this concept led to the sequel Bioshock 2, where I believe you play as a Big Daddy the entire time. Maybe I'll have to play that game for the first time next. Either way, once we become a Big Daddy, we need to lead a little sister through different parts of the city, eventually leading us to Frank. This was probably the only level of the game I didn't love. It's basically a giant escort mission which suffers from all of the issues that every escort mission ever suffers from. There are times where the little sister moves too slowly and I'm left standing waiting around. Having an escort mission be my last moments in Rapture wasn't the greatest last impression, but no big deal overall. Finally, we reach Frank, and we find that he has become mutated from taking on too much Adam in an attempt to get stronger. This final boss fight is often mocked, even by Ken Levine himself, and yeah, it's nothing too special. It's surprisingly easy and kinda just has you doing the same thing over and over again. But hey, I thought the animation where you drain the Adam out of him was pretty cool. Once the fight is over, we get the ending of the game, and I have a lot to say here. Most of this video has been nothing but praise with some minor complaints. Now let's get a bit more controversial. I did not like how this game ended at all. So Bioshock has 3 potential endings depending on how you choose to handle the Little Sisters. If you save them all, you get the good ending. If you kill more than one of them, you get the sad ending. And if you kill all of them, you get the bad ending. I ended up with the sad ending, which I'm tempted to call the normal ending since I would assume it's what most players will get. In this ending, Jack turns on the Little Sisters who had helped him, takes over the city, and steals its nuclear weapons. This felt like total whiplash, as it did not line up with anything that had happened leading up to it. The entire third act of the game is about befriending the Little Sisters and helping them. In the final fight, they save you and are ultimately the ones who defeat Frank once and for all. Then the screen cuts and you suddenly turn on them. It felt especially bizarre because I had chosen to save nearly every little sister I came across. The character I had chosen to portray was very sympathetic towards them, but because I didn't save every single one, he betrayed them. On top of that, this ending barely differs from the bad ending, which is essentially the same exact thing, except the narrator sounds angrier. So you're telling me that my ending is basically the same as the guy who killed every single little sister he could find because I didn't save a couple of them. That just doesn't really make sense to me. The only ending of Bioshock I do like is the good ending. In this ending, Jack saves the Little Sisters from Rapture, allowing them to grow up and live normal lives. As Jack becomes old, the Little Sisters are there for him, giving him the family he never had. This ending is great, I think it's beautiful, and it lines up much better with the third act of the game. It's unfortunate that most players probably never even saw this ending since its restriction was so tight. I feel like the only way I would have known to go for this was if I looked it up beforehand, which ruins the experience. I have considered maybe the reason for this ending is to push the narrative of Jack never fully being in control of his actions. So even if you are mostly sympathetic towards the little sisters, it doesn't matter in the end. But in reality, I think this ending issue may have been a sign of the times more than any kind of deeper meaning. This was right around the time when multiple endings started to become a big trend in gaming. Ken Levine has gone on the record to say he didn't even want multiple endings, but their publisher 2K really pushed for it. And with multiple endings being a somewhat new thing, the writers and developers may have just not known how to implement it in the best way. Because I do think having a bad ending was somewhat necessary. If the player chooses to kill every little sister they see, it wouldn't make any sense to suddenly save them in the end. And vice versa, since I chose to save most little sisters I saw, it didn't make sense to betray them in the end. So the real problem comes from the third ending, which is far too similar to the bad ending, punishing certain players way too hard. I think they should have just simplified it and said if you kill more than you save, you get the bad ending, and if you save more than you kill, you get the good ending. Locking me into what felt like a pretty brutal ending was kind of a bad last impression with the game, but complaints about the ending aside, it wasn't enough to take away from my fantastic experience. Obviously, a lackluster ending is disappointing, but if the only thing I didn't like about a game was the last 90 seconds, that's probably a pretty good sign. Overall, Bioshock completely lived up to my lofty expectations. I went into this fully expecting one of the greatest single-player first-person shooter experiences ever, because that's what everyone always told me. That's a pretty high mark to hit, and somehow, Bioshock managed to do it. This game's world and story captivated me in a way that not many games have. Rapture is such an incredible setting. I can't think of any other game that pulled off a location like this so expertly. Rapture is so effective because despite being truly disturbed, it still feels eerily similar to real life. I genuinely never wanted to stop playing the game, anxiously awaiting the next plot twist, the next area of Rapture to explore, or the next psychotic character to meet. It also helped that the story, besides the ending, was put together perfectly, with just enough turns to keep you guessing without ever throwing something at you that feels out of place. And keep in mind, the story I talked about today is really just the start. Bioshock's lore goes incredibly deep. I mean, it's almost the type of lore I would expect from a series of novels. It's incredible how much they put into this world. Reading about Rapture's intricate history has kept me thinking about Bioshock long past the credits rolling. I can't believe I waited so long to play this absolute masterpiece, and I'm already looking forward to checking out some of the other installments in the franchise, as well as Ken Levine's new upcoming game, Judas. I hope you enjoyed this video about my experience playing Bioshock for the first time. Let me know in the comments below, what are some of the all-time great video games that you think everyone needs to play? If I haven't played it yet, maybe I'll check it out in a future video. Thanks for watching.